He heard all I said without attempting to controvert any of my arguments, and I had begun to hope that he prevailed upon to do it as I desired. But when I ceased speaking, he said all he knew very well all I had said was true, and that to resort to such a course was the most horrible alternative which could enter into the mind of man, but that he had now held out as long as human nature could be sustained, that it was unnecessary for all to perish, when by the death of one it was possible and even probable that the rest might finally be preserved, adding that I might save myself from the trouble of trying to turn him from his purpose, his mind having been thoroughly made up. On the subject, even before the appearance of the ship, and that only her heaving in sight had prevented him from mentioning his intention in his earlier period, I now begged him, if he would not be prevailed upon to abandon his design, at least to defer it for another day, when some vessel might come to our relief, again reiterating every argument I could have devised, but in which I thought likely to have an influence with one of his rough nature. He said in reply that he had not spoken until the very last possible moment, that he couldn't exist no longer without sustenance of some kind, and that therefore in another day his suggestion would be too late, as he regarded himself at least. Finding he was not to be moved by anything I could say in a mild tone, I now assumed a different demeanor and told him that he must be aware I had suffered less than any of us from our calamities, that my health and my strength consequently were at that moment far better than his own, and that either of us, Peters or Augustus in short, that I was in a condition to have my own way by force if I found it necessary, that if he attempted to in any manner acquaint the others with his bloody and cannibal designs, that I would not hesitate to throw him into the sea. Upon this he immediately seized me by the throat and, drawing a knife, made several ineffectual efforts at stabbing me in the stomach, an atrocity which his excessive debility alone prevented him from accomplishing. In the meantime, being roused to a higher pitch of anger, I forced him to the vessel's side with the full intention of throwing him overboard. He was saved from this fate, however, by the interference of Peters, who now approached and separated us, asking the cause of the disturbance. This Parker told before I could find me any matter to prevent it. The effect of his words was even more terrible than what I had anticipated. Both Augustus and Peters, who had long secretly entertained the same fearful idea, which Parker had merely been the first to broach, joined with him in his fearful design, and instantly upon its immediately being carried out into effect. I calculated that at least one of the two former would be found still possessed of sufficient strength of mind to side with myself in resisting in any attempt to execute so dreadful a purpose. And with the aid of either one of them, I had no fear of being able to prevent its accomplishment. Being disappointed in this expedition, it became absolutely necessary that I should attend to my own safety, and as a further resistance on my part might possibly be considered by men in their frightful condition a sufficient excuse for refusing me fair play in the tragedy that I knew would speedily be enacted. I now told them that I was willing to submit to the proposal, merely requesting a delay of about 1 hour, in order that the fog which had gathered around us might have an opportunity of lifting, when if possible that the ship we had seen might be seen again in sight. After great difficulty, I obtained from them a promise to wait thus long, and, as I had anticipated, a breeze rapidly coming in. The fog lifted before the hour had expired, when, no vessel appearing in sight, we prepared to draw lots. It is with extreme reluctance that I dwell upon this appalling scene which ensued, a scene which, with its minute details, no after events could have been enabled to efface in the slightest degree from my memory, and whose stern recollection will embitter in every future moment of my existence. Let me run over this portion of my narrative with as much haste as the events nature of the events to be spoken of will permit. The only method we could devise for the terrific lottery in which we were take each a chance was that of drawing straws. Small splinters of wood were made to answer our purpose, and it was agreed that I should be the holder. I retired to one end of the hulk, while my poor companions silently took up their station in the other, with their backs turned toward me. The bitterest anxiety which I endured at any period during this fearful drama was while I occupied myself in the arrangement of the lots. There are few conditions into which a man can possibly fall where he will not feel a deep interest in the preservation of his existence. Interest momentarily increased with the frailness of the tenure by which that existence may be held. But now the silent, definite, and stern nature of the business into which I was engaged, so different from the tumultuous and dangers of a storm or the gradually approaching horrors of famine, allowed me to reflect on the few chances I had of escaping the most appalling of deaths. A death for the most appalling of purposes. Every particle of that energy which had so long buoyed me up departed like feathers before the wind, leaving me a helpless prey to the most abject and pitiable terror. I could not at first even summon sufficient strength to tear and fit together the small splinters of wood, my fingers absolutely refusing their office. My knees knocking violently against each other, my mind ran over rapidly 1,000 absurd projects, by which to avoid becoming a partner in this awful speculation. I thought of falling on my knees to my companions and entreating them to let me escape this necessity of suddenly rushing upon them by putting one of them to death, of rendering the decision of my lot useless, in short, of everything but going through with the matter I had in hand. At last, after wasting a long time in this imbecile conduct, I was recalled to my senses by the voice of Parker, who urged me to relieve them at once from the terrible anxiety they were enduring. Even then I could not bring myself to arrange the splinters upon the spot, but thought over every species of finesse by which I could trick one of my fellow sufferers to draw the short straw as it had been agreed. That whoever drew the shortest of 4 splinters from my hand was to die for the preservation of the rest. Before anyone could condemn me for this apparent heartlessness, let him be placed in a situation precisely similar to my own. At length delay was no longer possible. With a heart almost bursting from my bosom, I advanced to the region of the forecastle where my companions were awaiting me. I held out my hand, and with the splinters, Peters immediately drew. He was free. His, at least, was not the shortest, and there was another chance against my escape. I summoned all my strength and passed the lots to Augustus. He also drew immediately, and he was also free. And now, whether I should live or die, the chances were more than precisely even. At this moment, all the fierceness of the tiger possessed my bosom, and I felt toward my poor fellow creature, Parker, the most intense, the most diabolical hatred. But the feeling did not last, and at length, with a convulsive shudder and closed eyes, I held out the last 2 remaining splinters toward him. It was full 5 minutes before he could summon resolution to draw, during which period of heart-rending suspense I never once opened my eyes. Presently, one of the 2 lots was quickly drawn from my hand. The decision was then over, yet I knew not whether it was for me or against me. No one spoke, and I dared not satisfy myself by looking at the splinter I held. Peters at length took me by the hand, and I forced myself to look up. When I immediately saw by the countenance of Parker that I was safe, and that it was he who had been doomed to suffer, gasping for breath, I fell senseless to the deck. I recovered from my swoon in time to behold the consummation of the tragedy and the death of him who had been chiefly instrumental in bringing it about. He made no resistance whatever and was stabbed in the back by Peters when he fell instantly dead. I must not dwell upon the fearful repast which immediately ensued. Such things may be imagined, but words have no power to impress the mind with the exquisite horror of their reality. Let it suffice to say that having in some measure appeased this raging thirst which consumed us by the blood of the victim, and having by common consent taken off the hands, the feet, and the head, throwing them together with the entrails into the sea, we devoured the rest of the body, piecemeal, during the 4 ever more memorable days of the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th of the month. On the 19th, there coming on a smart shower which lasted 15 or 20 minutes. We contrived to catch some water by means of a sheet which had been fished up from the cabin by our drag just after the gale. The quantity we took in all did not amount to more than half a gallon. But even this scanty allowance supplied us with comparative strength and hope. On the 21st, we were again reduced to the last necessity. The weather still remained warm and pleasant, with occasional fogs and light breezes, most usually from north to west. On the 22nd, as we were sitting close huddled together, gloomily revolving over our lamentable condition, there flashed up through my mind all at once an idea which inspired me with a bright gleam of hope. I remember that when the foremast had been cut away, Peters, being in the windward chains, passed one of the axes into my hand, requesting me to put it, if possible, in the place of security, and that a few minutes before the last heavy sea struck the brig and filled her with, I had taken this axe into the forecastle and laid it into one of the larboard berths. I now thought it possible that by getting at this axe, we might cut through the deck over the storeroom, and thus readily supply ourselves with provisions. When I communicated this project to my companions, they uttered a feeble shout of joy. And we all proceeded forthwith to the castle. The difficulty of descending here was greater than that of going down in the cabin, the opening being much smaller, for it will be remembered that the whole framework about the cabin companion hatch had been carried away, whereas the forecastle way, being a simple hatch of about 3 feet square, had remained uninjured. I did not hesitate, however, to attempt the descent, and a rope being fastened around my body as before, I plunged boldly in feet foremost and made my way quickly to the berth, and at the first attempt brought up the axe. It was hailed with the most ecstatic joy and triumph, and the ease with which it had been attained was regarded as an omen of our most ultimate preservation. We now commenced cutting at the deck with all the energy of rekindled hope, Peters and myself taking the axe by turns, Augustus's wounded arm not permitting him to aid us in any degree, as we were still so feeble as to be scarcely able to stand unsupported, and could consequently work but a minute or two without resting. It soon became evident that long hours would be necessary to accomplish our task, that is, to cut an opening sufficiently large to admit of a free access to the storeroom. This consideration, however, did not discourage us, and working all night by the light of the moon, we succeeded in effecting our purpose by daybreak on the morning of the 23rd. Peters now volunteered to go down, and having made all the arrangements as before, he descended, and soon returned up, bringing up with him a small jar, which to our great joy proved to be full of olives. Having shared these among us and devoured them with great avidity, we proceeded to let him down again. This time he succeeded beyond our utmost expectations, returning instantly with a large ham and a bottle of Madeira wine. Of this latter, we each took a moderate sup, and having learned by experience the pernicious consequences of indulging too freely, the ham, except by about 2 pounds near the bone, was not in a condition to be eaten, having been entirely spoiled by the salt water. The sound part was divided among us. Peters and Augustus, not being able to restrain their appetite, swallowed their upon the instant. But I was more cautious and ate but a small portion of mine. Dreading the thirst which I knew would ensue, we now rested a while from our labors, which had been intolerably severe.